Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Hello there. Welcome back, everybody.
And so, guys, please do subscribe both channels if you haven't. Double check. Make sure you got that little bell clicked. It's fascinating to see how these things go back in the searches all the time. And now after doing this one, this is one of the ones that they don't want out there the most. The very, very, very most. And I'll tell you right now, plain and simple, you could expose anything about the political system, even about what's going on with the C period, U period, R period, E period. This topic is something that they want discussed even less than those.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something that's going to make you friends, and it tends to bring certain people out of the woodwork. But you know what? I'm really kind of tired of everything being so secret, because we're moving into an age where we can see and we can speak to one another, and we should understand, because when we do understand, gosh, that's where the power is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, there's so many different traps that have been laid for humanity out there. So many different traps. This is like the last trap, sort of. And that's why this is so important to them. Because they understand people are going to wake up. They're going to realize the media, you can't trust them. Maybe we never could have trusted them. We never should have trusted them. From the beginning of the media. If you want to think all the way back to the Flintstones, and they're throwing stone tablets into your front yard in the morning. Paper boy, here comes that stone tablet. You better duck it. As far back as the media has been there in the dark Kali Yuga, it's been corrupt. Always corrupt. Always carrying out the will from those that come from above, and not above in a benevolent sense. Not at all. Again, there's above and then there's above. See, everything is distorted. Everything is twisted, and it's done completely on purpose.
It is. It's very deliberate. Very, very deliberate how they work things. How they manipulate things, because they do have a much deeper understanding and knowledge of the dark forces and how to bring those dark forces to work in people's lives. And they do that. And they do that with the understanding that nothing is going to happen to them. But like I said, times are changing. I'm really tired of everything being so secret.
So shout from the rooftops, and that's exactly what we're doing. Although this is, some of the most dangerous shouting you can do, because this is what hits home more than anything, really. So again, you recognize the media is something that has been a tool for these dark forces, and you recognize the politicians, again, are tools for the dark forces. Then you recognize the whole system of C period, U period, R period, E period, so to speak, is again another tool for the system. And then the biggest tool of all is that which is brought about through religion. And when we look again, you see here Obama using two BIBLESs at the swearing in ceremony. There's not a problem here. He didn't go poofed up in fire. Again, one technique they will use is they will sacrifice, so to speak. Sacrifice is a giving an offering of something that is the person's, or thought to be, of the person that is of his own free mind or will, giving up something to show a token of faith, a token of goodwill, what have you. Well, in some dark, horribly dark ways, everything we saw in W period 2 is a sacrifice. And we could go into the layers of that. We're going to have to speak cryptically, but, again, Yeshua did also speak cryptically, because he was under behind, let's just say, behind enemy lines, so to speak. He was under the dark system when he came. Now, what we're going to discover is, so is Yeshua and Jesus just the same thing? Well, some will say, well, that's just simply the translation going from Hebrew into Greek, Aramaic, and then into Latin, and then into English, and we know the line of thinking, but is it really the exact same thing? You gotta understand, there is power in sound, and there is power in the spoken word, and again, every single word, when you vary it a little bit, it'll have a different frequency to it. It could mean a different thing. Sometimes words have two meanings. Absolutely. And of course, every single one of them, proudly, you can see how upright he is standing. And he is so proud. He's got that hand firmly on there. It's not burning up. Not at all. Quite the opposite. And, some think that presidents should not swear in on a Bible. And, again, every single one of them they picked out their favorite versions. Only one didn't actually swear in, and that was early on in the history of this country. And, it's interesting, too, because it goes back to speaking about Washington and his choices. And Washington, of course, was a Freemason, and I'm reading Albert Pike's Dogma and Morals, which is all about Freemasonry. And what is Freemasonry? It's the Western hidden mystery tradition. And Albert Pike comes straight out and says this early on. He says, in the East, philosophy and religion is one and the same, and it is philosophy, religion, mysticism. In the West, they are split apart. The West is what has been used to control the minds of the masses, and the control system that's in place has been in the West. Now we have the new world order underway, and it's all going to shift all the way to Beijing. And so it's heading all the way to the East. And it's, again, part of giving a new dogma, wiping out the old, and that happens constantly, because dogmas just serve a purpose for a certain period in time.
Mm-hmm. And we look at these Bibles, and we look at those who are putting their hands on them. And if the Bible is that is all 100% true and just completely the word of source and cannot lie, then how come, nothing is happening to them when they put their hand on the Bible? I find these politicians to be very, very, deceitful, extremely deceitful, yet they just slap their hand on there like it's nothing, like it's a Saturday magazine. What's up with that?
Yeah, again, there's power in thought. There's power in intention. There's power in focus. There's power in words and sounds. Again, Tesla said, if you really want to talk about the mysteries of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, vibration. Everyone has a specific rate. When you take one person, and that one person develops the ability to focus greatly on one particular thing, that person can excel and seemingly do things that the masses can't do. Again, whether it's LeBron James, or I'm not even sure who's playing basketball nowadays. In my day, it was Michael Jordan. But actually, I used to visualize Scottie Pippen. I liked his game. So I would visualize him in my mind, and I would find all of a sudden I'd go on a streak, and I could, hit baskets that I wasn't hitting before. The power of visualization is so important. When you get the mass of humanity, a big chunk of humanity, believing the same stories and sending energy into an energy stream together, it doesn't matter if they understand it or not, there's tremendous power. So again, if Jesus, per se, never walked the earth, there would still be tremendous power in the name of Jesus. Why? Because billions of people have believed in Jesus. Right now on this world, we probably have peaked right about 8 billion people. And unfortunately, I do think that number is going to not be going any higher. because of everything that we're seeing on this planet. Yet, of that, 2/3 believe in the Abrahamic tradition. So they're either professing a belief or saying that they're coming out of a belief system that comes from Judaic roots. And then, of course, Christianity is the largest at about 33% of the world's population will say it's Christian. Islam is right behind it, closing in on about 30%. So again, 2/3 of the world comes from the Judaic Abrahamic tradition that includes Christianity and Islam. And of course, in Christianity, you got over 1,000 different branches now. And the founding fathers were like, oh, freedom of religion. We must have freedom of religion as long as you're a Christian. Okay, well, if you're Jewish, well, again, you're kind of kin, so to speak. And, of course, there's always been conflict between Islam and Christianity. And it's been intended to be that way. But see the way they treated the indigenous people here who had various thought and belief systems. And Albert Pike, too, was very, very, he didn't put them on the same pedestal. I mean, he thought they were barbaric. He showed lack of understanding for somebody that's very well read. He was really well read. And again, what is Freemasonry? It's the study of things like the Kabbalah, first and foremost, and which is what? Jewish mysticism. It had to be hidden from the masses. They wanted the masses to believe the basic stories, the basic allegories. They themselves didn't believe the basic stories and allegories. Those are for the masses. The mysteries are for the initiates.
The masses are very, very important for them to use these rituals. They need the masses to follow a storyline, to have one belief. And that way, when they do these rituals, it gives these unseen forces the power as long as understanding is limited.
As long as understanding is limited. And it's limited because when you still have people that believe, all these things as literal tradition, and even counting the years between Noah and the coming of Jesus, per se, and following the lineage and all that, and, viewing the 7 churches as being literally 7 churches, 12 tribes of Israel, literal 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles, and not looking into the symbolism at all, then the masses are going to be in the dark, but they're going to be feeding the system. And their ignorance is the controller's bliss.
Mm-hmm. They're what they are for, their energy is to feed the rituals.
So, even though they don't understand what's really going on, as you see this diagram, they're sending out energy all the time to something that has been set up by the controllers. We see the story of the golem in which, basically a thought form is created by somebody in the know to give a particular job to. We can create thought forms. Again, source, the true creator, God with the big G, and that word doesn't even, you can't encapsulate source. It's impossible because source is everything that's manifest and everything that's not manifest. It's everything that ever was and will be, and everything that never was and never will be. It's beyond any sort of encapsulation in our current manifested form, and perhaps even beyond those that are not encapsulated in a 3D body as well, to a degree.
Well, if you are able to name it, it's not source.
Yes, and that is the Tao. So this is why, again, and you'll get even people in the know, like, say, Albert Pike, who would be a professed Christian, but they're not. Again, when you look to all these politicians putting their hands on the Bible, are they Christians? No, that's for the masses. Same thing with Islam. And it doesn't mean that they're worshiping Satan per se, because they understand the bigger picture. They know how the universe works. They understand quantum physics, and quantum physics is a clue. We are living in a sea of consciousness. We can manifest anything, really, positive, negative, and every form of in between. What they do is they cultivate our power to manifest, and they use it to their advantage.
And it's, it's just something that is going on and on and on. And I mean, they don't mind. They don't mind at all because they're benefiting from it. They're the ones who still have all the comfort. They have all the needs. They can take care of their families. Everyone is well fed. Everyone has everything they could ever need, want, or desire. So they're just going to allow this information to flow, and they're going to allow the masses to continue to feed their rituals under the guise of something that it's not. And I just, that's so wrong and it's unfair, but guess what? They do it.
If you really want to study the mysteries of the universe, then you're better served, truly. It's easier to study the Tao Te Ching, for instance, and go straight into the mysteries without all the dark magic that's been used to cover up the truth that we find in the biggest books in print. And again, that we're talking about the Bible and the Quran. So what Cindy had said, and it's not committed to memory. The Tao Te Ching is not committed in Cindy's memory. I've read it through many times, as I've read through the Bible and many other books, and so many things are committed to my memory, just like Nostradamus quatrains, as well as many other things. But this is here, verse 1. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. So Yahweh, Allah, Jehovah is not source. And not even the creator of this universe. This is all part of the bigger diabolical plan that's in play to harness the energy of humanity. In the story of the Golem, it's a thought form that is created. It's very much the origin of the Frankenstein monster mythos, so to speak. And then it gets a life of its own, and it runs havoc. And of course, the karma is on the creator. Recognize that. The karma is on the creator of the thought form. Thought forms are nothing for people to mess with, especially if we are not of the clearest perceptive ability, the strongest mind, the stoutest inclination to always try to do good for the masses, good for the world itself. If there's any little bit of ego that can grab a hold of us, we should steer clear. Is my perspective on it. I don't think, again, this is a path that can easily go very, very dark. So I'm bringing this to the intention so that people won't go and try to create thought forms. Quite the opposite. That you'll be aware of the thought forms that have been created already that are harnessing your energy.
I think that's the best thing to do here is bring it to people's attention. Bring that light of information around to the forefront, because, sometimes I hear people say, well, whatever you don't know doesn't hurt you. And I don't find that to be true. I find people have good intentions and they have a good heart, yet things go wrong.
So there's a couple of articles, and none of these articles we wrote, so we don't totally agree with them. But just to give people a little basis, if you want to get a better understanding of what's an egregore and thought forms in general, these things are very real, and I've encountered them and in my life, and have found thought forms that were created by other people that can manifest physical occurrences, such as moving things, creating noises, being disruptive, even breaking items and causing problems. So these thought forms can be created intentionally or unintentionally, And poltergeist is something you might have heard before. Poltergeist literally translates into noisy ghost. Now, there are ghosts per se, which we can view as deceased human spirits, and in many cases, just imprints of energy from something traumatic. Now, when we see, say, Gettysburg, man, you walk, I'm getting cold. Just, do you feel that? As soon as that comes to mind, there's this coldness that comes sweeping in. The horrors that these monsters perpetrate on humanity time and time again, which they're doing right now in Ukraine, and they are trying to create for the entire globe, these things leave energetic imprints that will be apparent to anybody with any sort of sensitivity. How many of you guys have walked into a house? Maybe you go and looking at a house, you're going to move. You walk into the house and you're like, oh, God, no. Oh, no, not this one. And maybe you'd find out later something bad really happened there, maybe not. But you could feel the energy. It's the same thing that's been imprinted on the planet, where there's these massive battles that take place, massive atrocities that take place. You'll find that a lot of times these battles are taking place on ley lines. And this is just what the guides are telling me, is again, they have usurped the natural ley lines of the earth. There were many places that were of reverence to what you would call, quote unquote, pagans. And of course, they looked down on pagans, thinking that, oh, we're monotheists. We believe in one God. But then they don't recognize that they're feeding the very darkness that they're supposedly fighting. Well, these areas of power, natural power, ley lines, intersection areas, if we want to equate them to the body, we would equate them to acupuncture points, where you can do a lot of good. You could simply, insert a little metal rod in this one spot here. You're going to draw energy to it, which is going to help your liver cleanse. There's a reason why acupuncture works and energy work works. It's because we are, again, electromagnetic beings. That's our very nature. And it's all about energy flow and proper energy flow. They can disrupt the natural energy flow of the planet itself by creating these horrors in particular areas. And they'll do it time and time again. You ever wonder why some battlefields end up having wars on them many years apart, decades apart, centuries apart? Well, they're just strategic importance. Yes, strategic importance, with a capital S to the dark powers.
Right. I mean, everything that they do is to see to it that they remain in power. So nothing is by accident.
No. So, to be aware of things like egregores. Now, there are many different types of beings out there in the manifest universe, in the multiverse, and even in the unmanifested. We've talked about archetypes, and when we look to many of what we would call the devas, in some ways they are archetypes. Lakshmi, you could look at her as the archetype of abundance, and Ganesh as the archetype of overcoming challenges.
Oh, yes, Ganesh is a good one of my favorites.
Now, there's also, besides these archetypes, which again, we can also look to these beings at the highest levels as being closer and closer to source. And then it's kind of like a flow chart. And when we look at this flow chart, it branches off and branches off and branches off. And as you go farther and farther down the branches, we get away from source, but into specialized, localized pieces of consciousness. And I don't know if I'm losing or if that's a clear enough picture.
No, I mean, I refer to them as dominant guides and subdominant guides.
Yes. Let me hand this to you really quick.
Mm-hmm. So when I look at a dominant guide, I see that as one of our original beings that has come down and decided to have another experience. And subdominant guides, when you're looking at those, you're usually looking at, many times it's friends, it's relatives, it's your ancestors, it's your moms, dads, grandparents, and the dominant guides are those individuals or those entities that have a lot more power, but when they want to reincarnate and they want to send their energy down, they can't send their whole selves. They have to send a part of themselves, and some of our energy is more dominant to one entity than it might be to another. So the subdominant guides, I see those as we have more of those around us, more of those work with us. And I really mean that when we talk about friends, friends that are just people, maybe you meet them and you feel like you've known them forever and ever. Well, you probably have, and you've probably been working with them for quite a long time. And maybe sometimes you feel extra close to that grandparent that had recently passed, and you just have a real kinship with them. Well, there's most likely a life there where you two did a lot of things together, and you continue to work together, and they continue to help you, and they're able to work with you more because you were closer. You were so much emotionally closer to them than your dominant guide.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to say it. So Shintoism is a belief system of many over in Japan. Some will say it's ancestor worship. Some will say it's worshiping nature spirits. So they don't really view things as gods per se, but they do view things from the term of natural forces, and also these beings they call the kami, which are very similar to what we would call the devas. So when we look to a family tree, if you want to equate this to source being up here, and then we go down into these major archetypes, and then as you go down farther and farther, you get more and more specific archetypes, and on so on down, and maybe you're right here. So all these beings above you, you could tap into energetically, and you could call on their powers, and you could call on their skills. And so, often when I'm doing construction or something, I'll call on one of my grandfathers and say, luckily I got Cindy here, and I could say, what's Grandpa say? Which way should I do it? And of course, they won't do it for us, so he'll just give a recommendation, such as, well, sit down and write down, the two most obvious possibilities, and think it out, in a structured way. They won't just tell you what to do, because this is our experience. They've had their experience over here. And here we are now, and it's our experience. And we are them to a degree, and they are us to a degree, but we're all unique at the same time. And this is how we can go all the way back to source. How do we have the power to create thought forms? Because source is in us. Source is in us. They don't want you knowing that. They view you as, again, just energy. You're a tool. You're a resource to them. And so they are using us to create the reality that they want. Thus, they give us these thought forms. When you see the Baphomet, Baphomet's very famous, and, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a Templar representation. Again, you have to recognize, too, history is written by the victors. So there's many distortions, many distortions underway. Baphomet is a thought form. Baphomet is a thought form that they have, basically been given, and also have augmented many thought forms. When we look to Bohemian Grove, what do our leaders, like, Mr. Reagan, Mr. Nixon, and others, where they bring into existence thought forms, and this will probably send shivers up some of the controllers' spines when they realize that it's out there in the open, that this is what they are doing. As you see something that looks kind of like a demonic deer. Yeah, well, what are they doing in Bohemian Grove? Well, it's just a gentleman's club. We're just joking around. No. You're basically doing magic. Magic is the, it's the art of bringing about manifestation of your will through just using your will and intent. And in the case of humanity, using the intent of humanity at the same time and the energy of humanity. If they get, 1 point whatever billion people, 2 billion people, 3 billion people helping to bring about Armageddon because they believe in the prophecies, it's obviously going to help their cause. They've laid it out. They've laid it all out for us. Same thing with the Skull and Bones. They're Skull and Bones men. These lodges, what do? Oh, they just, they're drinking tea. That's it. Yeah, out of the skull of Geronimo. It really is supposed to be the skull and bones of Geronimo. 322, we've touched on that. How humanity can't become like the gods themselves. And then when we look to, is it El? Is it Jehovah? Is it Yahweh? Is it Allah? Again, many of the words have been translated in different ways. The oldest translation is in the plural. Elohim is the oldest reference we have. But again, you can see this is saying, this is talking about what we were talking about. Deuteronomy 32:8, the sons of God were assigned to different nations. 32:8, this is, and literally originally the sons of the gods were assigned to different nations. They're talking about the beings that we would call the Nibiru and Anunnaki. Jehovah assigned to Israel. By the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Jehovah grew in stature, supplanting El in certain respects as the Jews developed proto-monotheism. Yeah, it was a slow, gradual development. And again, anybody that says the Bible is the Word of God, they're not really getting the big picture here. There is some truth in there. There's more distortion is the bottom line. There's more distortion than truth. And we would really be better served studying the Tao Te Ching, the Yoga Sutras, things like that are really just going into consciousness itself without any of the dogma that's been put in there by the controllers. And even, again, the dogma and the divisiveness has found its way in the Dark Age into every tradition, including Buddhism and Hinduism, and we could go on with all the different isms. It has all been basically infiltrated to degrees. So this is where you have to develop your discernment. But if you just go deeper, you'll find these things, and you'll find the development that has come. So, what is Yod-He Vod-He? And there's a whole form of magic centralized around this. And we know, when we look into Enochian magic given to John Dee through his seer, Edward Kelly, John Dee and Aleister Crowley, they both feel bad about what came about from their quest for the knowledge of these things, because what did they contact? They contacted the control grid, and they were given stuff that can cause and did cause some damage.
Like when you look at these energies and you look at these people, you get these impressions and this information, and it's not about trying to make any sense out of anything. It's just reading the energy that is right there in front of you and accepting that and understanding that. So it does take some practice, but the practice comes in where you're not building any rationale out of it. You're just reading it for what it is. And that's exactly what I got out of those two, is that they had done things that created quite a karmic situation. And they're currently working that through right now. Had they known, had they had more information on these subjects, on these topics, they would not have done things to the extent that they did.
So again, the Elohist and Yahwist traditions, and then also the Deuteronomist, which is the priestly source. What is the real truth? Well, it's interesting when we scan El, it's very much the energy. Well, it's not dark. And you were getting more of a picture of a cloud when we were doing L.
Yep.
It feels like it is a creative power of sorts. And there is a something to do with a cloud. And, boy, you see God depicted as being in a cloud. And this is where that comes from. As, in past ages, without being exposed to the foods that we are, the water that we are, the cures that we are, right? When you go get think about it, prescribed. What's a scribe do? A scribe writes things down, right? Prescribed. Yeah, all these things affect our consciousness so that the masses really don't have the capability, typically, because they don't even have the inclination. They don't even realize that they are not clear. Their consciousness is not clear. It's not focused. It's not the way it would be if we were brought up 3,000 years ago and weren't affected by everything, including the invisible signals, which are all around us, affecting our ability to think clearly.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point. When people do have, they get these medicinal cures written on paper through someone, and yes, they are written down because they're supposed to do something for you. And there's other things, people are very impressionable. Sometimes people can look at somebody who has a cough and a sneeze. Well, they might actually get a cough and a sneeze just because of that other person did. They are so extremely empathic. So if you're getting something scribed like that and they write down what it's supposed to do or what it's supposed to not do, that's giving the impression. I mean, everything down to the tiniest detail, they understand how this dark magic works, and that's one way.
Mm-hmm. So again, they use different terms depending on the source for the name of what they interpret it as, God or the gods, because originally it wasn't the plural. And, there's a lot of links. I'll give you the links if you want to go deeper to start to discover, because, again, so much of the world is totally lost and just doesn't, the majority of the world doesn't have a clue of all this, even though it's right out there. It's right out there, and one of my dear friends from years past would say, the Bible is the inerrant word of God. There's not one error and contradiction. And it's like, no matter how many hundred I gave him, it wouldn't matter, because, it's not going to get through, because he won't let it get through, because this is his paradigm. It's totally his paradigm. So again, there's lots of people that have found these things and discovered and said, what's really going on here with Yahweh and El and Elohim? And, the fact that Asherah has been wiped away from all these belief systems. And yet, when we look back to what we have found inscribed, there's references to Yahweh and his consort Asherah that are older than anything we have. These are going back 830, 760 BC, 750, 700 BC. What's the oldest Hebrew Bible? Dead Sea Scrolls are fragments of the oldest Hebrew Bible texts. The Aleppo Codex and the Leningrad Codex are the oldest complete versions written in the 10th and 11th century AD. AD, 1,000 years after, the one that Jesus is based on walked the earth. And these are, again, this is all part of the control grid that's been given to us by these beings that we could reference as the Anunnaki Draconian. They're part of this AI collective. And again, they promote slavery, and they promote subjugation of the female below the male. There's not balance there. They've given us this monetary system, and they are colonial in nature. And we find these very, very reptilian statues all around. Now, again, the ones that we think of, we could view as fallen Pleiadians, so to speak. They are beings that were caught in this great Lyran war, and they ended up basically just like, say, in World War II, when Germany steamrolled into Poland and other countries, and habited and took over those countries for prolonged periods of time, in many cases, you had people that, jumped on board and helped them. Well, this is again the same case with the Nibiruans. They became part of the system. They became part of the problem. And yet each one is an individual. So you'll have some that have what we would perceive as more heart than others. Some that wish maybe they didn't make that choice.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's just so much information, and I really invite you guys to, if you are going to be working with an entity or a guide, sit and get to know this energy. I mean, feel it, understand it, build a relationship with it. Don't just go out and take people's words for it, because we are responsible for what we do.
And we were talking again, just bringing you think it's just some sort of synchronistic stroke of odd luck, so to speak, that Colossians 3:22 would say, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Slaves, obey your earthly masters. Where does that distinction come from? What's the alternative to earthly masters? Hello, wakey, wakey, smell that coffee. Obviously, slaves, obey your earthly masters. And when we look again to the skull and bones, what's the numbers that they're given? 322, 322. And then, we could also look to Genesis 3:22, which says, now that mankind has bitten of the knowledge of good and evil, they cannot have eternal life like us. And so again, their life really truly is not eternal. Their misery is, because they're stuck, completely stuck, and they want us all to be stuck with them. And this is Exodus 34 again. And it just talks about alien gods. You shall have no other alien gods. Destroy all your graven images. Why? Why should we destroy? Oh, because we'll notice what they really look like. Yeah, that's why. Again, 5 to 7 billion printed Bibles. Do you think that that's truly the Word of God when you live in the satanic system? How could that? It wouldn't be allowed to go through. There's no way. Look at what they suppress on all the media. The ones that get huge views are part of the system. The books that get printed more than others are part of the system. This is only just obvious.
Yeah, it is, and it's just something that we want to bring forward. That's part of our mission.
Because again, and this is what my original thought was, you recognize you can't trust MSNBC, you can't trust CNN, you can't trust the Washington Post, New York Times. Now, you can't trust the leaders, you can't trust the left, you can't trust the Dems, you can't trust all those on the left. And still now, when you see that list that came out that were getting donations by Gil Bates, you can't trust much of the right either. You got to come to that realization, two sides to the same coin. The last thing is your belief system. And if you are trusting the mainstream belief system and you are saying, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the what? My what to what? Think about what you say. Think about your intention. Because here you are, you might have woken up to everything, but in the end, you're asking to be a slave.
Right. The belief system is everything.
Absolutely. So we say this with much love. Yes, there is a creator. Yes, Yeshua did and does exist. And he is truly a being of light and love, compassion. And don't feel, like you can't call on Yeshua. Of course, you could call on Yeshua. You could call on the angels. The archangels are real powers of a very, very high elemental sort of being. And as Cindy would say, those are some of the biggest guiding forces that are out there. And, just build that discernment. So there is a creator of this particular universe, and there is a creative source behind everything that was, is, will be, and even will never be.
Indeed.
As always, guys, thanks for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. Much love, God bless, and namaste.
Namaste.